But with that, it's actually 5 past, and so I think we're going to get these faculty office hours started. My name is Julian Thielman. I'm an assistant dean of admission here at Reed College. I work with students from Portland, but not the rest of Oregon, Seattle, but not the rest of Washington, as well as students from Vermont, Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, also New Jersey, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and that's about it. And with that, I will just pass it over to Christian to introduce himself, as well as talk a little bit about the Spanish department here at Reed.
Yeah, hello. I'm Christian Kroll in the Spanish department, and also I teach in the Humanities program, which I'll talk about a little later. I'm originally from Peru, also lived many years in Guatemala, and here at Reed, like for, I think it's my 10th year, 10, 11, 10, I think. Anyway, so the Spanish department we are like 5 faculty in the Spanish department. And I would say like it has 2 main components, the language component and the more, I would say like cultural component. Language is the basic 2 years, and it depends on the level. There's a placement exam that if you don't have taken any Spanish, you start at like first year Spanish 111, but you can actually enter the language sequence at the intermediate level or even at the advanced level. Yeah. So most students take the placement exam at the very beginning during orientation week if they're interested in taking Spanish, for instance. And that doesn't mean that you have to take Spanish the first year, but right? So, so it's 2 years of Spanish if you come to Reed with like zero knowledge of Spanish. And the 300 level classes we offer a variety of classes. Some focus on Spain, the Hispanic world, the colonial times sometimes, early modern times in Spain, and they vary. Like we offer classes, some classes are focused on like literary analysis. We have film classes focused on film theory, film analysis, and we have also classes that are focused more on a topic. For instance, like I teach a class called Space and Power. So I include like theory, spatial theory, and also like political theory, anthropological theory, combined with like cultural works from this Hispanic world, like films, essays, novels, short stories that help us discuss issues of state and power, for instance. That's one class, right? Another colleagues teach like a class on Don Quixote, seen from the 21st century. So you not only read Don Quixote, the original one, but you also read and discuss how Don Quixote has influenced many works, present works, for instance, right? Another colleague teaches a class on the Baroque art. So in the 17th, 18th centuries. Now, like this year, we have like I teach a class on Latin America revolutionary century. So we examine different revolutions throughout the 20th century in Latin America. A mix again of like novels, films, and theory, critical theory, philosophy, political theory that helps us understand, like for instance, the concept of revolution, the concept of the guerrillero, the concept of how power is legitimized, and with a focus on the Hispanic world, but it's more thematic than geographic in that sense. Another class is that I'll be teaching next year too is Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx critical theory. So it's a class mostly focused on how like artists, philosophers, writers, and critical theorists have understood Latin America, the Caribbean, and the US as a specific space. Right? So that's, you get a wide variety of classes, and we offer a major. The major you have to the language requirement is at the level of a 320. You can either fulfill that by following the whole sequence and getting there, or by a placement exam that puts you at that level. So once you have the 320 level, then you can take any upper class, or if you can prove that you are at the 320 level, 321, 312, level, then you can take classes. And I don't remember the exact number of classes, but I think it's about 8 credits, in between 8 and 10 units, not counting language, that you need for the major. And we also offer a minor. And the minor, it depends where you enter in the language sequence. For instance, if you begin at the very basic level, 111, you have to complete the 2 years. So that's 4 units. Each class, each course during the semester, full semester is usually 1 unit. So that's 4 units, and then you have to take 3 more classes, and you have the minor for 7 classes. If you enter at the 300 level, you only need to take 4. So it depends, right? The minor, but the idea is that you know enough of the language, you can use the language at a certain level, at the advanced level, and have some classes on cultural aspects or political aspects in Latin America and Spain. And you can also, we also have what it's called language scholars, like all departments of language have. It's every year, like someone from, in our case, is from Argentina and from Spain, who are part of the language classes. So usually around 25, 28 years old, who are either fulfilling a master's in literature or have some experience teaching languages. So they apply and we pick 2 and they come here for a year and they help with the language teaching, right? So you meet, besides meeting with your professor, like in the language class, you have a conversation hour doing, which is mostly about like using the language, right? And they live in the Spanish house. Now we have 2 Spanish houses. So there are like language houses, and you can apply, not the first year, you can apply with sophomore or 3rd, 4th year to live there. And the idea is that, like, the commitment is that you have to speak the language of the house while living there most of the time, right? So that is another way to practice. And the language houses also organize different cultural activities. Like, for instance, they have once a week the cafecito, coffee hour, in which just people drop by who want to practice Spanish, right? Or film screenings or specific cultural events. And that's most about. I don't know if you have any questions about like Spanish department or the teaching of languages in general, or anything you want to know about that.
Yeah, for the students in attendance, please feel free to pop questions into the chat as they come up. But Christian, you also teach Humanities 110. So I'm wondering if you can sort of introduce that as a concept to us as well.
Sure. So Humanities 110 is the only class that all students have to take. And it is a year-long course in which like the whole cohort is divided in groups of 17, sometimes 16, might be 18, but most of the time it's 17. And you get assigned a conference leader, which is a professor, and it's the whole year, right? So what is the purpose of Hum 110? It introduces students to different disciplines, mostly in the humanities and social sciences. It is also the writing intensive course. And it's also the way in which you familiarize yourself with like the conference format, which is one of the staples of it, right? So the conference format is discussing, usually like in a circle somehow, the material for that day. And it's based on discussion, it's not based on lecture. That's conference, right? So Hume combines lectures and combines conference. So you have 3, some weeks 2, but most of the weeks 3 lectures, 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes each. It's a unified syllabus, so everybody's reading the same things at the same time. And some conference leaders might like add a little bit here, or I don't know, we're not reading this specific test, but in general, it's a unified, I would say like 98% is a unified syllabus. So you are reading the same material as everyone else in the first year at the same time. So, and you have 3 lectures, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And now I don't know how it's going to be next year. Oh, I do know actually. Next year is going to be we have like an in-person lecture, like more or less every 2 or 3 Mondays, depending on the material. And the rest of the lectures are online, so you can watch them on your own. And they're assigned for specific days, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And the lecture is on the readings for that day. Readings, when I say readings, it includes visual art, it includes films, it includes, of course, novels, it includes official documents, so different formats. And yeah, you read the material, you watch the lecture, and you come with questions to discuss what you read with your conference leader, professor, and your classmates. So that's more or less the format. You also write 7 papers throughout the year, 4 in the fall, 3 in the spring. And after each paper, you meet with your professor to discuss your writing. So the idea of this course is helping students to improve their writing, right? And like learning or improving argumentative, like an argumentative papers with a thesis, how to formulate a thesis, how to write an introduction, how to present your argument, how to find evidence in the text, how to do close readings of the text. So make an interpretation of the text according to an idea you have about the text. So improving your writing, formulating ideas in writing, and also formulating ideas and defending, arguing, I don't know, exchanging views orally, right, in conference, which is the main focus of the class for 50 minutes, 3 times a week. Or depending on the professor, sometimes it's an hour and a half, 2 times a week. So you can choose the schedule. And that's in general the class. So lectures it's a team taught class, which means that lectures are written by professors in ancient Greece, Greek, Latin, and ancient Mediterranean, Spanish in my case, political science, art history, what else? English, French. So you get a kind of a perspective from different disciplines. So how does somebody from political science analyze a text differently than someone from history? Right. So what are the emphases that each discipline has? So you get a kind of a test of a little taste of multiple disciplines, especially through the lectures, and also the material we're reading, right? So it's not only written stuff, it's also visual. As I mentioned, in the spring, it might be films too. And currently the course focuses, in the fall, it focuses on cultural interactions in the ancient Mediterranean. So ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Persia, Israelites, and how like culturally interacted. So we read, for instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh. We also read like Greek tragedies, but we also read much lesser known also stories, Egyptian stories written like 2000 BC, and or the Persian inscriptions by Darius and how that justify power. So it's focused more in cultural interactions, and I will say like general categories as how is power legitimized, how is power contested, how is citizenship thought, what is the meaning of community, what is the meaning of borders, what is the meaning of migration, right? So the idea is to introduce different topics, but the purpose is, as I mentioned, is the writing and the experience of sharing like a discussion session with your peers. Right? So that's the goal of HUM. And we try to achieve that goal by reading different materials. In the fall, I mentioned what the courses focus on. In the spring, we have like half of the spring is focused on Mexico, especially Mexico City, since the Aztecs, since pre-colonial time, up till the Zapatistas in the 1990s. So we focus on one specific place and how that place has changed over time, how issues of race, gender, ethnicity are produced, contested, how different factors affect the creation of the modern nation of Mexico, how Mexico has justified itself as a nation, how colonial society influence or created a hybrid society with Aztec, the consequences of conquest, etc. Right? And in the second part of March, we focus on the Harlem Renaissance. So mostly we read and we discuss material written, produced by African Americans during the 1910s, 1920s. We read anthropological works, for instance, by Du Bois. We read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. So it's mostly focused on issues of aesthetics, politics, and in that case, race too, right? So that's an overview, a very general overview of Hum 110.
Super. So Humanities 110 obviously covers a lot of ground, not just historical and geographical, but also in terms of its content. And I'm wondering if you personally have a favorite text, a favorite unit to teach, and why.
Huh. I don't know, actually. I will say like there's plenty, but I like the first part usually of the fall semester because it's so strange for us. The first time you encounter like those like very ancient epics, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Egyptian material, is very strange, to put it somehow. So to have to like actually interact with texts that are very strange to our experiences is I think it's very productive and it's wonderful. I also like, for instance, the Mexico unit, probably because I work on Mexico too, and it's like closer to like it's the material I know the most from my research and my like academic scholarly work. But I learn a lot also like by reading the Harlem Renaissance material. And I think like from my perspective as professors, it's very enriching experience because like I will say like 70%, 80% of the material in Hume, I was not familiar with the first time I taught Hume. And of course, that gets incorporated into my own scholarship, like writing an article on Mexico, but suddenly you know that people in the 1920s in Harlem, African Americans, were discussing the same ideas, which I was not aware, right? So I also, like, it leads to a collaboration among faculty too. So, and text, I don't know, like Invisible Man is an amazing novel. But the novel I like the most that we read is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Solanir Hurston. That's an amazing, beautiful novel. And in the fall, I don't know, I've always liked Exodus from the Bible. We read parts of the Bible too. Exodus is like just a wonderful, fascinating political story. So we read Genesis and usually we read Genesis and Exodus from the Jewish Bible, but we don't read them mostly as religious texts. We read them mostly as political texts or anthropological texts, mythical texts, right? So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, those are, and the Epic of Gilgamesh for me is fascinating. The first epic that we have ever found, written like 3000, I think 3000 BC, something like that. Yeah, that's the first text you read when you come, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. It looks like we have a question in the chat from a student who asks, in English we spend the time, but in Spanish it's pasar el tiempo. This example shows how different languages and its speakers understand the same concepts. As a native speaker, which new perspective has learning a new language brought to you?
Uh, like what was my experience learning English? Is that the question? Because
I think it's a question about in the process of learning a new language, we develop new perspectives. So I guess like what is uh, a new perspective that you gained in the process of learning a new language, and to maybe to flip it to students, what do you think students gain perspective wise as they learn Spanish?
yeah, I don't think it's only, you're not only learning a language and being able to communicate with people you were not able to communicate before learning it. It's also, I think it first, it makes you learn your own native language much better, right? So most students that learn Spanish in my classes, for instance, because you learn mostly based on grammatical structures, suddenly you realize that English also has subjunctive, right? and you've never been aware of that. Like if I were, that's subjunctive in English, right? In Spanish, it's very common the subjunctive. So you don't only like, I think it improves your own knowledge of your own native language, but also you're kind of learning to think a little bit how another culture sees things. And I think that's the most valuable thing about learning a language. It's not only the ability of like being able to communicate, but actually the ability to start to understand things from a different perspective. And which of course also helps you expand your own perspective on your own culture. Because once you start learning how another culture, through the learning of that language, sees things, you start to compare with your own culture, right? So you end up like learning two things at the same time. You learning a lot about yourself too, and your own culture when you're reading and learning a second language. So I think it's like there's like at least two aspects that are beneficial to learning a language. And also it's like learning to play an instrument, right? So it expands, and this has been proven on a neurological level. It expands the amount and frequency of like neurological, I don't know, networks, right? When you learn to play an instrument when you're like 4 or 5 years old, and when you learn a language at that age too, and or even later, right? So it also it expands the way you think in general. I will say that's one of the main benefits of learning a language. And in my case, I went to a school in which I had to, like, I went to a German school, so I was learning English and I was learning German too. The funny thing is that I learned German from German professors who had studied English in Britain. So I learned kind of a British language filtered through German professors, which is a little weird, but that was the case. And it's amazing. It's just amazing to be able to explore other cultures by the language, right? And cultures. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question, Mike. But yeah.
Yeah, that was great. You mentioned something about you mentioned learning from your students, especially in a class like Humanities 110. And I'm wondering if this carries on into when you advise students on their theses, and if you have any theses that you're advising students on currently.
You mean how thesis works more or less, or you mean
How thesis works, also, stuff that students have written about in the Spanish department, what students have written about when you've been advising them, that sort of thing.
yeah? Uh, I've advised thesis like from the Spanish department on a specific, for instance, writer, Yuri Herrera from Mexico. And this particular student chose to write a thesis in Spanish, which is not very often. Doesn't happen very often. You can write a thesis in the Spanish department for the major. Most students write it in English. You are working with like Hispanic material written in Spanish, but you can write the thesis in English. But this particular student wrote the thesis in Spanish, and you can do that too, right? So that was on a specific writer and how their novels related to concepts of space and border between Mexico and the US. Another thesis that I remember is on Ecuadorian hip hop, actually, right? And it was an analysis not only of the influences of like African American hip hop, but also how Ecuadorian hip hop related to Quechua and Aymara roots, right? How they combine that. It was a fascinating thesis. Another thesis is like women guerrilleras, like women guerrilla fighters in Central America, and some texts they wrote after their experience, how like issues of gender, issues of motherhood, like being a mother and in a guerrilla at the same time. How do you navigate that? The experience of being woman in a revolutionary movement in Central America. And I also advise theses that are not Spanish majors, but for instance, comparative literature majors. Right now, my thesis student is his thesis is on St. Petersburg and a novel written in Russia in the early 20th century. I also advise last year, for instance, it was a thesis on two Caribbean artists from República Dominicana and Puerto Rico, and the relation with concepts of like disasters narrative, right, and climate change. So there's a wider spectrum of theses. And the good thing about, like, for instance, relating it to Hume, it's fascinating because I do end up, like, some of the students I have in the first year in Hume end up taking some of my classes, but most do not, right? Just by numbers. But suddenly in the fourth year, because they still remember Hume, right? So, and when you're at your thesis, you usually need somebody who is outside your division as part of your oral exam. So I get, like, it's very nice to, like, encounter students at the very beginning, fall of their first year, and being part of their orals at the very last thing they do at Reed, right? Which is the oral presentation of their thesis. So that's fascinating. And I almost always say yes to any student that I've had in Hume when they ask to be part of their oral part. Right? And some students end up, like, in Spanish too. So, and sometimes I've had many students who came to Reed, for instance, I want to major in biology. And throughout the year at Hume, of being exposed to material that they have never been exposed to, or just were not aware, suddenly realized that I actually want to major in history, right? That's their thing. So Hume also, like, opens your view, opens the I don't know, opens your perspective on the possibilities you have for majoring, right? So changing majors is something that happens often the first year. You don't declare your major up till the end of your second year, but you have to kind of indicate the intended major, right? So you come here with the idea of majoring in biology, but somehow you end up majoring in history, and sometimes Hume just changes your perspective of things, right? And there's a question about by Matthew, during the course, do we have opportunities to travel abroad to Spanish-speaking countries? Yes, definitely. And we highly encourage, like, majors in the languages, not only Spanish, to go abroad, because there's only that much that you can learn by language by never being in the country where that language is spoken, right? So yes, study abroad is encouraged in the language departments, and at least we in Spanish have, like, various opportunities. You can go to, like, we have programs in Argentina, we have programs in Mexico, Chile, Spain. There used to be one in Cuba, but we are reevaluating it right now. There used to be one in Ecuador too. We are reevaluating it. And you can go there as a Spanish major and take classes in Spanish in most of these programs. You can also go and take classes in Spanish for an anthropology major, right? And we probably will help you, like, if you're interested in going to an abroad country in like in Spanish speaking country, even if you're not a major Spanish major, we will help you, right? So, and also you have the option of studying abroad without knowing the language or not being interested in the language. For instance, if you are a sociology major, you've never taken Spanish, you don't want to learn Spanish, but you can still go to Monterrey in Mexico and take classes in English, study abroad. You have to take one class in the language, like, learn the language. If you have never taken Spanish and you decide to go to Monterrey, part of the requirement is you have to register for a language class, right? But you can take the other classes in English. So in Spanish, the idea is that you will go and take, like, a full credit, like a full semester, for classes in, I don't know, the University of Buenos Aires. So, and you will take different classes that most of them, almost always, you can count towards, like, the Spanish major or even division requirements. Hopefully that answers your question, Matthew.
Well, so we talked a little bit about thesis, but how do you advise students throughout the course of their study at Reed? So like from their first year until that final year.
Mhm. So you will be assigned an advisor. The admissions office does their best to find you an advisor that shares your interests. And for instance, we don't have many students coming to Reed wanting already to major in Spanish, right? So I advise, or my colleagues might advise, like students interested in the humanities in general. But for instance, because I also work with, I don't know, spatial issues, I might get students from anthropology that are interested in anthropology in general, right? Because I do use a lot of anthropological theory in my classes. And for instance, I am advising a lot of computer science students. So computer science, like there were many students coming with interest in majoring, and there were not enough professors to be advisors for the first 2 years. So I and other colleagues like got a good information session with our colleagues in computer science to know the details about the program so we can advise students in that program, right? And there are other colleagues that are like specialized in a program or department that it's not theirs. So the idea is that you will end up with some advisor, and during the first 2 years, like your first year and your sophomore year, the advisor is, I will say, like the first stop, right? At least the first year definitely is like you have a question, you ask your advisor. And the first time you meet with your advisor will probably be to register for the fall, like fall 2024. So you more or less know the classes you want to take, and you run them through your advisor. And the advisor might suggest, yeah, instead of this, you should take this because the requirement or so it's a conversation. And then like you meet with your advisor every time you want to like registration, and you register for classes in the fall, you register for classes for the whole year. So you register for classes for fall and spring. Then registration is open again in December, I think, and you can change the classes for the spring, right? But the idea is that you register for the whole year. So, and first year, I will say fall is usually very easy because it's usually a science, and usually a humanities, language, social science class, right? So you get a little bit of everything. And the spring is much more open, right? But I've had students that really they're interested in, I don't know, like English, but they really want to know if they are interested in English. So they take an English class the first semester. So they are, okay, yeah, I'm interested in this, or actually, no, right? And so there are different ways in which students approach this, but I will say like in general is helping students find the right classes, keeping track of the requirements, like the divisional requirements, not divisional, the group requirements, which is like different classes from different disciplines, areas of knowledge that you have to fulfill. And but also like if you having trouble in a class, if you're having trouble I don't know, with just like organizing your time. If you're having any issues about like social life at read, if you encounter something that it's affecting you. So usually the first person you will try to reach is your advisor. And in my case, I don't know everything. So, but I know, like, for instance, if you are having issues with, I don't know, anxiety, I know who to ask for help, right? Or if you're having issues about, I don't know, academics, right? So student services, for instance, right? Or if you have issues with a class, right? So what is the best way to approach your professor, right? So I try to help there too. So advisor is in general academics and also a little beyond academics, and related to academics mostly, but yes. And so I will say like, especially during the first year, it's like the first person you contact if anything happens or if you want to know something, right? Besides just registering for classes and guiding, helping you choose your classes, right? And after the second year, at the end of the sophomore year, you have to declare a major. And then you switch to an advisor in the major department for the last 2 years, right? So you get an advisor for the first 2 years, and then you switch. Some students who know, for instance, that they're like completely certain that they want to major in physics, sometimes switch advisors earlier on, but you have to have a minimum number of credits to declare your major, right? So, but that's details. But at the end of the spring, you have to declare your major, and then you're switched to an advisor in the major department. And who the advisor in your major department doesn't necessarily have to be your thesis advisor. That's different. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Would it be possible for me to take 2 languages at once and not major in either? Yes, you can, of course. For instance, like if you want to major in comparative literature requires that you learn 2 languages, one at the beginner's level and one at the intermediate level at least. So you are not doing it for the major in any of the languages, you're taking them for the major in comparative literature. Or you just, because you want to learn languages, yeah, you can definitely, if you have time for them, yes, you can definitely like learn 2 languages at once. And you can minor in them if you want, like you don't have to major in them. Right? I'm not sure if you have a limit of minors at Reed. I think you can only have 1 minor. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Because minors are kind of a recent thing. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what you think makes humanities at Reed distinctive or unique from they might be at other institutions.
Yes. So usually most institutions, either universities or colleges, like starting with the federal law requires that all institutions of higher education have a course that is focused on writing, right? That's like a requirement. So institutions have that requirement, fulfill that requirement in different ways. Most first year writing center courses, which Hume is what fulfills that requirement, like the class every first year student have to take, is what in most cases, it's usually what they call like a great books course, which is you just read like the canon, what some people decided are the great books, right? For instance, I don't know, the Odyssey, Antigone, a play, and you just move and you're reading the text, right? And you just get to experience one professor who is with you in the class, and you just read the text, but there's no context. There's no support to actually understand that text beyond the text itself. So that's usually what a great books class is. And in other institutions, you sign up for different classes. So there are like, I don't know, 15, 20 sections, first year sections, and each faculty teaches 1 section. And they come up with whatever topic they want. And it's usually closer to their area of research. So you have 20 seminars, 20 classes. They are completely different. And you just take the class and that's it, right? So the difference between Hume is that it's a unified syllabus. What that allows for is that you always have, like it creates kind of a sense of community among students, because you know that all of you in the first year teaching are reading exactly the same thing, exactly at the same time. So I know of students in like dorms that have like a Hume session to watch lectures, online lectures, and they meet, and that creates community, right? And another is that you get to see how faculty from different disciplines think. You're exposed to different disciplines and to different methods through the lectures that you will be watching. So, for instance, tomorrow, it's an English professor who is lecturing on the Harlem Renaissance poetry, right? And 2 days ago, right, it was a history professor lecturing on the history of Harlem as a neighborhood in New York, right? So you get different perspective, and sometimes through that perspective, you actually encounter what you are most interested in, right? And the other thing that it's different is that, for instance, and this is valid for all my colleagues, when the first time I taught Hume, I had never read like 80% of the material, right? So the idea is that it's not, I, as the faculty in that conference, I'm not talking from a position of authority. I'm talking from a position of maybe more experience than you, but I'm not an expert on anything that we're reading. So the idea is that by not being an expert, we are all learning together, right? We're all learning together. And the purpose of Hume is that the way students learn the best is when they are an active part of their own education, right? So you're not just a receptor of information, you're actually producing that learning in the classroom. And I think that it's allowed by having multiple like disciplines, being exposed to multiple disciplines, the conference format, which is mostly based on discussion, and also that it's a unified syllabus that gives you a sense of being part of a shared experience, right? Which is not, I don't think any other institution has a class like Hume. And also it's in these times, it's a bet on like the democratic values of conversation, sharing, and debate, right? So, yep.
Awesome. So you might have already touched on this a bit, but there's a question in the chat about advisors. So um, it would be great if you could sort of reiterate how students are assigned advisors, when their first meetings take place with their advisors, and whether or not students will meet with their advisors before registration, and then also what sort of input their advisors will give them when it comes to registration.
Yeah. So you usually when you apply, you usually wrote, like, in most cases you are the intention of majoring in biology, second option might be physics, third option linguistics, right? So based on that and a specific sometimes a specific, I don't know, information from your application, what the admissions office is trying to match your interest with a faculty that can help you, right? So for instance, if you indicate that you think you want to major in linguistics, like, we'll do our best to match you with an advisor from the linguistics department, right? It's not always the case, but in most cases, I will say when you have like a specific, or with people who have been trained in like me, like I know a lot about the computer science department, how it works and all the requirements, but I'm not in that department because it's only 4 or 5 of them, and there were plenty of students wanting to major there, so they just cannot advise everybody, right? So that's based on interest. Sometimes, like, based on specific, I don't know, aspects of your application, you might end up with an advisor that matches what you want sometimes. And yes, you definitely meet with them before registration. So let's say registration is Friday before classes start. And most cases, like, you meet either like Wednesday, Thursday. So you definitely meet with advisors 1 day, 2 days, sometimes 3 days before the registration day. And you will get assigned a schedule and all that, right? So it's usually 1 day before, right? If I remember correctly. Yeah, registration is on Friday before classes start usually, and you meet on Thursday, right? Or something like that.
I believe so. I'll find the academic calendar
Yeah.
and throw it into the chat so that we know for sure. But
But you
while
definitely meet with your advisor before registration, because, and you also, like, you cannot register if you don't meet with your advisor, because your advisor gives you a number, a PIN number that you need to actually register.
Gotcha. So while I'm looking around for the academic calendar so that we can get some exact dates on that, I love what you're saying about sort of staying with students either through Humanities 110 and then hearing what their thesis is about in their final year, or advising them. So do you know what students do after they graduate? Like what students in Spanish, or what humanities students tend to do after they graduate from Reed?
Humanities students, like, humanities is not a major, right? So it's only classes, like, it's the class there are like 200 level of humanities classes that sometimes, like, a lot of students take because they're interested in the subject, but you cannot major in humanities, right? So humanities is like the first step and then you move to other departments or other majors, right? So, but in Spanish, I don't know. It's like majors we've had have ended up like this advisee I had who wrote a thesis in Spanish. Like he's the now this was 2016, I think, 17. So he now works as the legal immigration liaison between, I think it's no, where's Santa Fe? Santa Fe is in New Mexico. Yeah, New Mexico Senate, the state Senate, and immigration issues, right? So he uses the Spanish to actually help undocumented migrants, for instance, in their process of acquiring citizenship, for instance, right? Another Spanish major is a filmmaker and works on documentaries. And documentaries mostly focus on like Hispanics in the US, right? We also have had like Spanish majors who end up being professors of Spanish in a university. And just another one who works for, I think helps develop software for like in Latin America for Spanish speakers, right? And people who just like use Spanish in their daily lives, but are not like directly connected to the Spanish major, right? But of course, knowing a language opens many doors. And so, yep.
Awesome. So I just put the academic calendar in the chat, and it doesn't look like dates for advising and registration have been announced for this upcoming academic year, but last year this happened on August 24th, sort of that general time frame when students would meet with their advisors to discuss registration.
Mm.
So Christian, you mentioned earlier cafecito, something that the Spanish department does to sort of foster community. And I'm curious if there are other things that professors in the humanities or Spanish professors do to also foster community.
Yeah, we like sorry, 2 weeks ago we had like the fifth or sixth translation symposium. So students choose a text in a language that is not English, and they have to translate it to English and present it in front of peers, right? Students. And usually you have like 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So, and the last one, there were like around like, I was like 25, 27 students translating like from their either native language or a language they have learned, like poetry, essays, letters. It's fascinating. And it's a really good event for like mostly language people and or comparative literature people. So that's another event. And we organize also like the language, international language lunch is coming, I think, in 2 weeks. And there are also by the language labs, there are like classrooms that are dedicated to language in which you can, for instance, go and use software to improve your language or communicate sometimes depending on the language, like with people in other countries. So they organize also like, I don't know, like speaking sessions just to share experiences in the language that you're learning. And different departments do like different events. Like for instance, I don't know, like the French department might have like a specific day in which they meet with their majors or people interested in the program. We also have during orientation week, we provide information about the languages. And also the more academic side is like the division of languages brings a speaker every year. So it changes the topic, but it's mostly related to issues of language and cultures. Also, departments also have visiting scholars to them that we bring to campus, and we have events around them. And in some cases, those who are invited also participate in workshops with students, right? Depending if it's possible, or even visit classrooms. And yeah, and the language houses organize different events, not only Cafecito, for instance, like Dia de los Muertos, there's always like a party and yeah, sharing food or preparing together like something, right? So yeah.
Wonderful. Do students in the Spanish department do any sort of do they tend to gravitate towards specific types of internships or different research opportunities while they are studying here at Reed?
Uh, I couldn't. I don't know. I don't see anything like that repeats itself. I guess like in few cases, like Spanish majors seeking internships, it's usually related to either immigration issues, like in a nonprofit, right? And wanting to spend, or for instance, I had a student who was from Berkeley and did an internship on, I think it was the city, the city of Berkeley program with homeless people. And like, so yeah, it's not very, I wouldn't say like most students do this type of internship. It varies. And there are some students too that work like, you can also, some of us sometimes hire students for research, like we collaborate with students, right? Or students helping projects. For instance, I don't know, like can be like doing a literary review of a specific subject, right? So there are opportunities too for students doing research in the humanities. The nature of the humanities is usually one-on-one, right? But if you're in the sciences, like there's like you can be part of a lab during the summer, right? So yeah, there are options for doing research too in the humanities, social sciences, and the sciences, right? STEM.
Are you able to provide an example of a time that you've collaborated with a student on this sort of research?
I haven't, but my colleague Monica in film did collaborate with students who help her find documentaries on a specific topic and kind of summary the argument of the documentary for a book she was writing, right? So she could use those as like evidence as backup to her own book. And another colleague of mine, a student work in the like index of the book, like finding words, using them in the index of the book. And what else? Yeah, that's from the top of my head. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, we've got 3 minutes remaining, so definitely pop any last questions in the chat now. Uh, but if those don't really come through, I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. Um, Firstly, we have a couple of admitted students in the call today. And if you guys haven't already registered for or attended a Read Admit Day, I would definitely encourage you all to do so. They're really fun events. We've got our first one of the spring season tomorrow. They're just a great way to meet future classmates and experience what life is like here at Reed. For other students, we've got a ton of really awesome events online happening, and I definitely encourage you to sign up for some of those and attend other faculty office hours that are happening in the next couple weeks because these are always really great ways to hear from professors. Um, and with that, I just want to thank you, Christian, for your
Sure.
time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This has been
And
really
if you any of you have any questions, just Google my name and read, and you will get my email and send a question. Okay? Don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.
wonderful. Well, awesome. Thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you all very soon.
Okay? Thanks.